Hey, how's it going, everyone? Hope you all are doing great. Today we're going to be doing a video here on just a simple Python program. This is going to encapsulate well the material that we covered in last video, where we just went over the basics, the very basics of Python with variables, loops, and conditional statements and whatnot. So if you haven't seen that video, make sure to go check it out. Once you've seen it, come back to this one and we'll build this program together. So first what you want to do is we're going to be using a Sublime Text. So we're going to be building our Python program, or writing it rather, within this text editor. Any text editor or IDE will work. I love Sublime Text. They're a great lightweight text editor. How it works is that you're free to use it as long as you'd like. If you want to buy the license, you can, but other than that, you're not obligated to. So with that out of the way, open it up. It should look something like this. Also open up a terminal, as we'll be writing our code here, then we'll be executing it here. Once that is all up and running, let's just do a simple one line within this text editor, and we'll just put a print statement here and just do the classic hello world. Let's save this to a directory here. I'll just save it to the desktop. Just save it as program.py. You can name it whatever you like, just make sure that at the end you append .py, as that would indicate a Python file that we'll be able to execute in the terminal here. So in the terminal, we want to make our working directory where we saved this file here. So if you're not familiar, just some basic terminal lingo here. ls is going to list out of what we have in the current working directory that we're in, and we saved it to the desktop, which we will need to navigate to. And to do that, we do cd, stands for change directory, and we'll type in desktop there. We'll do another list, and we could see program.py is within that. Great. So let's execute that. Or first, let's clear that to get all that out of the way, and we'll execute our program by typing in Python 3. And just a quick note, make sure that you have Python downloaded. Before you do this, you can check out my last video where we explain that a little more in depth. And then so Python 3 program.py, so space program.py, and that will execute a program. And as we can see here, we just get printed out hello world. Great. Next, let's create a function here and put this hello world within it. So we're just going to call our function main, and this is our function header. So when creating a function in Python, you're going to start off with the keyword def, def, and then space, and then the function name. We're going to call it main, and you have these parentheses here, and if you wanted to pass any parameters to your function, you would put them within those parentheses. But for this one, we are not going to pass anything. We got our function header. Just press enter and then tab, and we will put the statements that we want within our function on the new line and indented. Okay. So let's look at this real quick. We'll save this how it is. We're gonna run this program again, and as we can see, nothing is being printed out. Like last time we got hello world, this time nothing. And the reason why that is because Python is reading this file. It sees this function, it takes note that it does exist, but there's nothing there to execute that function. It just reads the function. It doesn't execute what's in it, which is the indented part below it, and so that is why we didn't get hello world. Now if we want it to execute what we have within main, when we run the file, we're going to add this to the footer of our program, of our file here. We're going to add the conditional statement if underscore underscore name underscore underscore is equals to main with underscore underscore main underscore underscore. And within this conditional statement, we will execute the function main. So what's going on here? Well, this variable right here is a predefined Python variable. So that the name variable, when executing a Python file directly, the name variable is automatically going to be set to main. Okay, so when we execute this file, this predefined Python variable is going to equal to main, making this conditional statement true and executing what's within it, which is main. So we should see it print hello world. So let's save that. Let's run the program, and as we can see, it does in fact print hello world. All right, so let's start building our program here. And I'm just going to just write out what we want to do in this program. So let's say, let's build a program that stores employee info, okay? So employee information. So each employee will have the following, so each employee will have the following info. We want to store the name of the employee. We want to store the contact, and this will include phone and email and employee ID. Here. So we have name, ID, contact, phone, and email. And then let's say create a simple, let's say terminal UI that will add employees, delete employees, and print all employees. Okay, so that's what we want to do here. Great. So Python being a object-oriented programming language, we like to store what we can into objects. So anything that makes sense to make into object, make it an object, because Python being an object-oriented programming language is going to make your life easier, and that is what it's built for, so that's what we like to do. So reading what we have here, what would make sense to put into a class would be, or make into an object, which therefore requires a class, would be to make an employee class, okay? So this employee class is going to contain the name, ID, contact, phone, and email of the employee. So to do that, we use the class keyword here. So it's just like making a function, but we're making a class here. So class space the class name, and in Python, class names are always uppercase. It's camel case with the first letter also uppercase as well. And we just have the colon here. So this is the header of a class. Now within this the content of the class, we're going to have functions that only pertain to this class. So the only way that we're going to be able to access the functions within the class is to make an instance of the class. And we'll see how to do that a little later in the video. So one function that is always in the class is called the init function, okay? And we always pass the argument self. So this init function is a function that Python knows to execute every time we make an instance of the class. So every time we create an employee, and that's what I mean by an instance of the class, we're essentially creating an employee. So every time we create an instance of this class, this function, the init function, will be called once at the beginning of the creation of the instance, okay? So if we want to set any default variables or anything like that, we would put those statements inside the init function. The arguments that we put in the init function here are going to be, when we create an instance of the employee class, we can pass parameters to initialize the employee with. So what we want to initialize each employee with, obviously, is the name, their ID, and their contact. And I'll just put phone and email here. So name, ID, phone, and email. And we're going to create class variables here. So we'll use the self keyword here to refer to the current instance of the class, and this is essentially how we build class variables. So self dot, then the variable name that we want. So we'll do name is equal to name. So the name variable that's going to be passed when we create an employee, the name variable is going to be set to the class variable name. we'll do that for ID. We'll do that for phone. So phone. And so actually when we see a highlighted variable like this means that this is a reserved Python variable name. So we typically don't want to use it. So we'll just do like emp ID for employee ID here, just to avoid any conflicts that may arise from that. So we have phone, and then we want email. Oh, not. So typically, so we have all these variables set as class variables, so we can access them after we create the employee class. Typically, what we would want to do as well is to check that the formatting of each of these variables is correct, such that like employee ID you might only want to pass an integer, or else an error would occur. You might want to catch that, or same thing with the phone, or we want to correct email address format. And that would be a good exercise for you guys to do if you'd like to do that, but in terms of the scope of this video, that is a bit out of it. So we will just proceed here. So we have our kind of basic employee class here. And what we can do is let's just create an employee real quick. So when I say we're creating an instance of a class, this is what I mean by that. So we'll just say like emp1 for our first employee here, and we'll use the class name employee. And also a note, Python is case sensitive, so make sure that all matches up. And we want to pass arguments to it. We want to pass the name, we'll say like Tom. We want to pass the ID. We'll say he's number 1, because he is. Phone number we'll pass as like 530-666-7777. That's how many are in there. Cool. Then for the email, we'll be like tom@gmail.com. Great. So that's our instance of the employee class stored in emp1. So it's creating our first employee here. And let's print out, for example, the employee name. So emp1.name. We can retrieve the name here by passing this name in this format right here, because name is a class variable here. So you can kind of think of self being analogous to what our instance name is here, but we refer it to self here because we don't have the instance variable name like we do here, so we default to using self. But so this is referring to essentially self.name, and since we stored name within that, obviously we should expect to see Tom. All right, so let's save that and we'll run our Python program, and as we can see, we get Tom. Let's switch this up a little bit. I'm gonna just to better encapsulate what we discussed in the last video, let's create a dictionary here for the contact of the employee. And we'll use a dictionary, obviously, and we can name our elements within the dictionary as discussed in last video. So we'll have the phone as phone and email as email. Oh, email, great. So now contact is stored in a dictionary, and we'll retrieve that later. What other functionality do we want here? So we have a class, employee class. It sets all the information of the employee that we want, as stated here, but we also want to create a terminal UI that will add employees, delete, and print all the employees. What we want to do here is we're gonna create our terminal UI in our main function here, because that's what executes when we run the file, so it makes sense to put that all there. So we're gonna have, we're gonna store all our employees that we have, all the employee objects, into this employees dictionary here, and it's gonna be indexed by the employee ID, because we're gonna assume that the employee ID is unique amongst all employees. All right, so what we're gonna do here is we're gonna introduce a new type of function in Python, which is called the input. So the input function it allows you to print something to the terminal by passing a string within its argument, but but it also allows the user to input a value that will then be returned by this function. So since this function is returning something, we can create a variable like user input, and we could state this variable with the assignment operator, so the user input will be stored within this variable. And we could see that right here. We will do just like, please type something, So this will be printed out to the terminal, and then we will then print out the user input of whatever the user inputs. So let's see that in action here. Whoop. So please type something, and then we print something. So we're able to grab an input that the user inputs within the terminal and store it into a variable. Now what we want to do is add the functionality to add an employee. Okay, so we want to add, delete, and also print all the employees. Let's start with adding an employee. So what information do we need from the user? We need them to input the phone number let's just go in order. So the name of the employee, we want to input the name, we want to input ID, phone, and email. So name, ID, we'll just do ID, let's make it look pretty, phone, and email. Okay, so this will be equal to the name, this will be equal to the emp ID here, this will be equal to the phone, and this would be equal to the email. Great. To make it look pretty, essentially, let's just put a colon and a space here after each input name there that we print out. So now we have all of these variables. We can now add an employee, and we're going to add an employee by the employee ID, and we're going to append it to the dictionary here. So as you know from the previous video, to add something in the dictionary, we can simply act like we're calling something from the dictionary by doing this. So we'll do emp ID, but we'll assign it something. What we're going to assign it is the employee object that we're going to create here with the name. I'll just copy this, employee ID and email. Okay, there we are. And so this should create the employee ID and store it into the dictionary with the element name within the dictionary being the employee ID. One thing to note here is if the employee ID does already exist, so if you call a dictionary element like this and the element that you pass already exists and you're assigning information to that element, the information that was previously assigned to that existing element will be deleted. Just one little thing to note there. Anyways, what we also want to do here is print all employees. Nice thing to do would probably be to iterate through each of the elements within the dictionary and print the employee object within it. So what we can do to do that is we could do for emp in employees. So remember, in for loops we have our object that we're iterating over, and we have the variable name that we're going to be setting to the element of that object during each iteration, right? So emp here is going to be equal to each element within employees during each iteration, okay? So it's going to be after this loop executes, emp will have gone through all the elements of employee, so we could just call print emp. So this is going to print all employee objects here. But one thing to note, since we want to retrieve an element of the dictionary using that key, which is emp. So we want to call employees, right? And then how we call an element within a dictionary is using these brackets and passing the key within it. So now this will hopefully get the result that we were looking for before. I set 123 as the ID. Whatever, we'll just go with it. T at. So as I mentioned before, we get the address of the employee object. So we get this is the address where it's stored on my computer, because we're just printing out our employee object just plainly with the print function, the default print function of Python. But what we want is we want it to print out the information of the employee rather than just this garbage here, you know. It's not very useful to us, at least not in this case. So what we want to do is we want to overwrite the print operator for the employee object specifically. And how we do that is that we put a new function here in our employee class, and we call it two underscores str underscore. And we pass self. So one thing to note here is for each function within a class, the first argument is always self. And that is because, so now whatever we return here, this will be printed when we print the employee object. So we're essentially overwriting what is to be printed here. By default, it prints this, but now we could like return, like, I don't know, return 1 here. If we return 1 here and we run this again, we're just gonna get 1. You know what? So we want to return a string here, obviously. So it's a non-string type because we just returned 1. We want to return string. This is a string, so it'll be happy. We'll clear this out of the way. We'll run this again. This is a string. So we printed out the object, and as we could see, we were able to overwrite this default print function when the employee object is passed within its argument by creating this function here. And what we want to do is we want it to print out the information of the employee. So we'll just create a new variable called print string, and what this is going to do is include all the information we want here. So we want to print the name of the employee. So we'll do like name is equal to, and how we concatenate strings together is just use the plus operator here. So we could just do plus, what do we want? We want to add the self.name there. And this backslash is just a fancy way of just going to just telling Python that, oh, I'm not done with this statement, just go to the next line and find the continuation of the statement here. So anything that I write down here with this backslash is still going to be assigned to the print string. So we want to concatenate another string here, and we're going to do a new line just with backslash n. So when we print this out, name will be on one line. We use this new line, so we have the ID that we have next is going to be on the next line. And we can only concatenate strings with strings, and the ID is most likely or maybe going to be an integer, so we're just going to cast it to a string to be safe. And actually in our case it technically won't be an integer because the input function here is only going to return a string, so we don't really have to worry about that. But in the case that it is casted as an int, it's a good example. You know, this is how you cast a variable to a string in Python. So we do another backslash there. I'm going to do the same thing here, backslash n, and then we'll have, let's see, so what we have the name, the ID, and then we want to do the phone number, okay? So we're going to add, and then we're going to do, let's say, so we have self contact, we have it in a dictionary, so we want to refer to the phone number part of that. And again, we could cast it to a string just to be safe in case, you know, later on when we expand this program, it's casted as an integer for a phone number or something as such. Who knows? Now we have email, and we want to add the email there. We'll assume the email is a string already. And there we are. So this should print out the information of our object here, and we'll just return the print string that we created up here. When we run this again, we should see that we get all the information. And we get an error. So emp ID is not defined. I forgot to, so we want to use this self here to refer to the variable name within the class. And now when we run it, we should be able to get the correct output. And we still don't have it because I did not save my file. And this is actually called just ID. We have it as ID here. Also, one thing to note is the email here is also stored in our dictionary, our contact dictionary, with the email key there. And so now looking at this, we should all be fine. I believe we are. So let's run that one more time. And as we can see, I mean, it's the exact same information here because we only have one employee in our employees dictionary. If we had more, then it would print out more. But we can see that it prints out all the information right here, just as it's inputted up there. So it looks like it's working out well. So we have a UI that will add one employee so far, and it also prints out all the employees here. So we have that. We don't have delete employee yet, but let's add the rest of the functionality here. So what we're going to do is just create a while loop, and we're gonna have the condition of the while loop be equal to true. And you got to be a little careful when you do this, because right now whatever in the while loop, it's technically going to execute forever until you have a specific exit statement. So you could use this while loop header just with the true conditional statement there, as long as you have a way to exit. You have some statement that's going to exit at some point, or else you're going to have an infinite loop, which is not too fun. So while true, what we're going to put within this is our kind of main menu that we want here. Okay, so what we're going to be doing in here is we're going to print out welcome to my program, yay. We're also going to have our options here. So we're going to say one is add an employee. Option 2 is let's say delete an employee. And then option 3 is going to be print all employees, right? So when we execute this, we're gonna see all our little menu here kind of printed out, and then we want the user to select one of these options, right? So we're gonna say user option is equal to input, and we don't need an argument input. That just won't print anything, so it'll still allow input from the terminal, but we just won't print anything. So this will all be printed. We'll have a user option to input one of these options, 1, 2, or 3, and now we're going to have conditional statements here, and which is going to help us execute the correct code based off of what the user inputted. So we'll do if user option is equal to 1. Oh, one thing too, we also want to cast the user input as an integer. So you remember what I said before, the input is always going to return a string. We want it as an integer, so we could do a conditional statement like this. So we could do a conditional statement like this, and have it compare it to an integer, or else if user option was a string that was 1, and we're trying to we're going to try to see if it's equal to the integer 1, it's not going to be satisfied. So we have user input is equal to 1. What do we want to do? We want to add an employee here, and this is our code to add an employee. Great. So we have that there already, and also we want to put that in there. So remember, anything indented with under the header of our statement there is going to be executed for that corresponding header. So I'll indent all of that within that conditional statement there. And remember, we have our elif statement, which if this if statement is false, it'll jump to this elif statement and check its condition. to see if we could execute what's within it. And we'll do the second user option, which is number 2. And what we want to do in number 2, we want to delete an employee. So right now, we're going to assume that the employee already exists. So now we can do additional checks to see if the employee exists already and throw an error if it doesn't and whatnot. But let's just assume, for the sake of this video, that the employee already exists. Each element within the employees dictionary here is an object. So how to delete an object in Python, we just use the del operator there. So del, and then we'll do, we want to ask the user, of course, which one they want to delete. So we could do, so input user, or it'd be like, or like employee ID. Okay, so it's going to ask for the employee ID, whichever one for the corresponding one you want to delete. And then we're going to call the delete operator, and we're going to delete the employees, the one with this ID. And we kind of did this in a little brief way here. So this is going to ask for the user ID. Then it's going to return the user ID, and since the user ID corresponds to the dictionary key for each employee, I said user but employee ID, then we will get the correct employee retrieved with this syntax, and the delete here again is going to delete that element within the employees dictionary. So lastly, we want if the user input or the user option is equal to 3, we want to print all the employees, and we have that code right here. So you see, I do have these like these spaces right here, but in Python they're ignored, so don't worry about that. It's just mainly to be able to read it a little bit better. And also, one thing I realized, like I said here, we want to wait to execute the while loop. So we're going to have a fourth option, which is just exit. So fourth option is exit. So we'll do elif user option is equal to 4. And how we exit a loop in Python, we just type in break. That will break out of the loop. We also want to have our last condition here, which is else. So this is like, if all of these conditions are false, then this else will execute. And when that happens, the user inputted an invalid input. So we'll just print out invalid input, right? So invalid input, that's what's going to print there. And let's see, so invalid input. Also, one thing I'm just going to do very quickly, after every iteration here, we're going to print out a line here just for kind of to beautify our little UI here. So let's run this program. Hopefully nothing broke, but add an employee. I'm going to say Tom. Again, he's still number 1. His phone number is 123. His email is tom@g.c, right? It says, welcome to my program every single time, which is probably only needed once. So we'll put that up here so it's only printed once. It's going to print every time here, but once we run it again, it's not going to. But since we've already have it running, just bear with me here with that. Let's add another one here. Let's do, the name is going to be Bob. All right, he is employee number 2. His phone number happens to be 456, and he's b@g.c. There we go. All right, let's test out our print all employees. 3, print all employees. Look at, we got Tom, his information, then we have Bob and his information. That worked out well. Let's say, unfortunately, Tom was fired. Oh man, I pressed enter by accident. All right, let's run it one more time. Let's add the employee Tom. It's number 1, phone number 123. I'm just gonna do T for email. add another employee. His name is Bob. His ID is 2. He is 456, and his email is B. Now we want to delete Tom. He either got fired or he decided to quit. Let's say that he got a new job opportunity and he's going somewhere else. That's great. And we screwed up here. So name error, employees is not defined. So we spelled employees wrong the whole time. Spelled it right up here. I guess I just had to type out and auto-filled all the other ones. A tip here for most text editors, if you do like Control or Command D, you'll do like kind of a mass select of all related texts, and so we could just mass select, change that to the correct one. Now we should be all good here. Wait, try out or exit really quick. Yeah, that works. Okay, let's clear that. Run our program again. Add employee. His name's gonna be Tom. ID is 1. Phone is 123. Email T. Add another one. Bob. ID 2. Phone 456. 546. Well, yeah, that works. Email that, and we want to delete an employee ID. Sorry, Tom. So we should have deleted Tom. Let's check by printing all of the employees again. And as you can see, we only have Bob. So there we are. We have this simple program that has our employee object right here, creates an employee with its information here. We also overwrote the print function for this object or the employee class in specific. So when we print an employee object using the print function in Python, we get this output, which is nice. And we have our simple UI that adds, deletes, or prints all employees. So you know how to create a simple UI, you know how to create an object, you know how to retrieve elements of that object. I hope you learned something going through this project with me here. Now, this is not the easiest first project, I would admit, but if you made it all the way through, congrats to you. If you learned something, please like this video. If you have any comments, suggestions on what I should improve, or any topics that you'd like to see in the future, please comment them below. I will be releasing a lot more Python videos in the near future here, as well as other languages like C++ and JavaScript. So look out for those, and if you are interested in learning more Python or another programming language, please consider subscribing for those upcoming videos. And other than that, I hope you have a good day, and I'll see you in the next one.